Okay, hopefully we don't put anybody to sleep when we turn the lights off. So I have been a master gardener for 10 years. I get my yellow badge this year instead of my green badge. And I do a number of presentations. The gentleman who runs the Speakers Bureau tells me that if he added everybody else up on the Speakers Bureau, I do more programs in a year than everybody else combined. So, and I thought I was doing Put Your Garden to Bed because everybody wants Put Your Garden to Bed at this time of year. But we're doing the Fragrant Garden. And when I finish this, I'll flip it over. I have a short briefing on peonies, which I just did a few days ago. And that's particularly relevant right now because now is the best time to plant, divide, or transplant your peonies. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. I do want to note, and it was a wonderful segue into this with the pollinator pathway, that many of our plants are fertile, meaning not sterile, so the bees and the hummingbirds love them. And a lot of times the pollen attracts our wonderful people that work with us. And I do want to mention, this is not an all-inclusive, but this is just kind of highlights of some of the most fragrant plants that I have in my garden and you may have in yours. And there are many others that I am not going to mention because I'd be here for 2 days. The first one is Korean spice verbena. And there is a smaller version of this called the spice ball. This blooms in the spring and is highly, highly fragrant. I have it outside a first floor bedroom window and it just smells like perfume in there. And the nice thing is that it does get berries, so the birds have something to eat from them. Here is just what they like. They're good in our zone. They're 4 to 8 feet. The smaller one is, I believe, 3 to 5. They bloom in April and May. They have very dense flower heads. They're a deciduous shrub. They look like full sun to part shade. Mine are in part shade. They do just great. And they make very, very good foundation plants. I have mine at the foundation outside of that bedroom bedroom window. And they have lovely color in the fall on their leaves. And they like it acidic, which means they really like us on Cape Cod. Peonies, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I'm going to do a whole program on it. But this particular one is Festiva maxima. It was registered in 1851. It's extremely easy to grow, abundantly fragrant because many of the hybrids we have now have had the fragrance hybridized out of them. Here they bloom for us in early to mid-June. They pair extremely well with irises because they have the same blooming time. And they like full sun, and you will hear when I do the peony talk that they want to be planted right at the surface. They do not want their tubers deep in the ground. And that Festiva maxima you see up there is over 70 years old. It was my grandmother's plant in her garden, and I've moved it 6 times now. And here's just another picture. And again, it's great in our zone, 2 to 3 feet, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to talk about this much because we'll hit it in the peonies. Here are 2 of C.L. Fenari's favorites, and I think justly so. They're both fragrant. Gardenias, frost-proof gardenias. I can tell you that even though they're supposed to grow in our zone, that they can be very touchy. Our cold winter night that killed all our mophead hydrangea heads a couple years ago decimated all the gardenias in my garden, even the ones I had at the foundation where it's a little warmer. However, they are so fragrant and so wonderful, I think they're worth mentioning. And they grow right at the edge of our zone, the frost proofs, but I'd be very careful if you put them in. You might want to consider that they're an annual. They do better if you surround them with burlap and put on an anti-desiccant, so it reduces the wind burn in the winter. When I have put burlap around them, I've made sure to have leaves around them to kind of, nestle them and give them a little insulation. But like I said, it's touchy whether they will survive the winter or not. However, they're so fragrant, I mention them. We are so lucky because this is one of the few places in New England we can grow the southern magnolias. And Edith Bogue in particular, and there are a couple of varieties that grow here, but Edith Bogue loves salt air. And at my house, I live in Eastham now, but that house you just saw was Orleans. I was like the second house in the street on Penny Lane. People used to walk down the street to see what the fragrance were. And if you've ever been to the Edward Gorey house, there's a huge one. The Cape Cod 5 in Orleans has a big one in back of it too. But the blossoms can be enormous, and their seed heads are wonderful in wreaths. Plus the fact that for us, one of the tricks is to, when you plant one, to cut off most of the new growth the first year or two, so that it's beginning to be very thick stems, so that if we do have a winter snow, it doesn't break the branches, because it's evergreen. It stays green all year long. The leaves are gorgeous. So what I do with mine is I go out and I trim off a little bit of the new growth every end of November, and I use it in my flower arrangements then in December. And they're wonderful if you spray paint them silver or gold too. And the bottom side of the leaves are sort of a brown. Here they are. That was the first one that I had. This was the second, the first year I planted it. You can see what the seed pods look like. They're really interesting seed pods. Even when the seeds fall off, the pods are really interesting for wreaths. Bracken's Brown Beauty is another one. It's very similar to Edith Bogue. It has a little bit smaller leaves and it's a little bit more conical. Edith Bogue tends to spread out more, but Bracken's Brown Beauty is very good here. There are some smaller versions too, because the ones I just mentioned, they can in the south become 50 to 60 foot trees. I have never seen one bigger than the one at Edward Gorey House, which I would guess is maybe 30 feet. So I think in our climate, they're not gonna get above 30 feet, but Teddy Bear and Little Gem stay small. They say their mature height is 20 feet, but I doubt they'd get above 10 here. So if you want that beautiful bloom, their flowers are not as big, but they still have the fragrance and they're fun. And I just noticed that my little dog was in that picture there. I don't think I'd seen that before, but there she is peeking in the garden. That little dog's 14 years old now. So the southern magnolias, the ones that grow here, are good in 6 to 9, and I think all of you folks are great gardeners. And what my goal in life is when I find plants, I try to find them that they go to one zone colder than what we are, in case we get a really cold winter. So we're 8A, so 9 looks good to me. They're evergreen. Their leaves are just wonderful. And as I said, consider protecting them the first few years, cut that foliage back so that the stems get stronger. And usually late spring or mid-fall is a good time to plant them. I'm going to give you some pros and cons because with these, there's a lot of pros and cons. Your pros are those beautiful, fragrant flowers. And most of them bloom in June, but you get sporadic blooms in July and August. Every once in a while, I go out and there's like a bloom on it. I go, where's that smell coming from? Best to prune them in November, and they give you wonderful foliage for the holidays. They've got big leaves, 5 to 10 inches long. They're glossy green on top and rusty brown on the bottom. The seed pods, they thrive in our salt air, and they're evergreen. However, underplanting is difficult. They tend to suck all the nutrients out of the soil. Grass won't even grow. So a mulch or a real hardy, shade-loving ground cover you can sometimes get to grow. The other thing, and the most annoying thing to me, is that they shed leaves all through the year. And they're big leaves. So every once in a while in my garden, I find a couple big magnolia leaves, but they're worth that. And they're sometimes hard to find in our local nurseries. And again, it's good to prune them when they're young so they don't get damaged by heavy snow if we have it. And those leaves will catch the wind, and sometimes they can suffer wind damage. Sure, go ahead.
How much do you prune them? I'm always hesitant on pruning.
On the question, if you didn't hear it, was how much do you prune them? The first year or two with these, I prune off almost all the new growth. And usually you can tell the new growth from the old growth because the new growth, the stem is greener. After about 2 years, I'm taking off about half of the new growth. And what that does, it makes it very dense and shrubby and gives me nice, thick stems. So that's about how much I prune it. Sweet alyssum. I think almost all of us must put sweet alyssum in the gardens or in our flower pots in the spring. They're fragrant throughout the entire blooming time, and they pair so well with so many other things. One of my favorites is one called Carpet of Snow. And if you cut them back about halfway after their first blush of blooms, they throw out another huge amount of blooms. And the one thing is with them, they don't like to dry out. So you need to make sure they get enough water. And if we're having a summer like we're having this one, that can be a challenge. Butterfly bush. And we heard about the pollinator pathways. These I see so many bees on and a lot of butterflies. They come in a lot of colors. Again, our really cold winter the other year, I lost a few in my garden. However, a couple of them that looked, maybe you'll make it, I cut to the ground and they've grown. So again, average acidity, they grow quickly. I like the smaller varieties. They have done very well for me. And I like, in my gardens, I like a mix of spiky things, low things, and they're kind of tall and spiky. So I particularly like them. And they do like full sun. They will take a little bit of shade. Okay, oriental lilies. And we do have a horrible lily bug here, which we'll get into them. Those Starlight Magic border lilies did great for a couple years, and then the bugs just kind of decimated them. However, the tall lilies, like this is Casablanca over here, and there's a couple varieties of tree lilies. Personally, I do not see the bugs on them, and they do a wonderful job, and they are so fragrant. And for some reason, the lilies seem more fragrant at night. And I don't know about you, but I love to have some white in the garden because I often sit out on my front porch at night, and those white plants at night just tend to stick out. And those lilies are wonderful. Some of the tree lilies I have are about 7 feet high, and they tower over everything. The fragrance is wonderful, and you see them very clearly at night if they're white. Again, this was, here I'm just showing you some of the ones that bloom through the year. Your irises are not particularly fragrant. Again, these have not popped that much. You're seeing the climbing roses. But now here you see in mid to late July, you see those carpet lilies all around, and I have some annuals there. This was my last house that I had. So again, there are varieties that you can get that do not grow in our zone, so be careful when you order them, that they are good in our zone. They typically bloom mid to late July through August. Very fragrant. Some of them can have up to 15 flowers, and they die back in the fall. They're herbaceous, and they have average water needs. I try to remove the flowers when they fade, and in the fall I cut the stems back. And I wouldn't be surprised, as we just heard, maybe the insects make homes in them, because they have a pretty thick stem. This is Starlight Magic, which is another one that's 3 to 4 feet tall. One of the cons with this is sometimes they're so heavy they need staking, but to me, they're worth it. Clethra, sweet pepper bush, and this is a wonderful native. The white is more the one that you find natively, but the ruby spice is a wonderful one to put in, and they're very fragrant. I love these. These are a native. This is one of the things that I put within the 100-foot zone at my house because they're natives. They like full sun, but they'll take part shade, and as a matter of fact, they actually prefer part shade. They will tolerate full sun, but like many of our natives, they love our acidic soil. And they like medium to wet soils, but they'll tolerate it being fairly dry. And they will, some of you here may have clay in your gardens. They will tolerate clay. And you do prune them in the fall if you're going to prune them. Corkscrew vine. How many of you have seen corkscrew vine? Oh, not a hand. This is the first time. This vine is incredibly fragrant. This is another one. When I lived in Orleans and I was half a block from Rock Harbor Road, people would walk up to see what that fragrance was. If you go to Mystic Seaport, this is where I first saw them. They have a white picket fence, and they have these growing outside of them. They are a vine. They are not hardy in our climate. I have successfully held them over by bringing it in, but their blooms, they almost look like wisteria when they bloom, but they are so fragrant. And I just love that corkscrew on them. It's just unbelievable, but it is a tropical vine, and I didn't see the difference in blooms between a newly purchased plant and plants I wintered over in a sunroom. They're not horribly expensive. You can grow them from seed, but I wouldn't particularly suggest that. And I have used them in hanging baskets with trellises, and any place you would use a vine, they're wonderful. They're worth trying, and consider them like an annual, but they bloom very late in the summer. I have midsummer to early fall, but I was usually seeing them like mid-August to October. And we don't have a ton that shoots out new blooms at that time, other than our annuals that will still be blooming. So that's one of them. Some other standards, of course, are hyacinths in the spring and our narcissus. Some of them are fragrant. I call these the old standard favorites. Lilacs, of course. Honeysuckle. And honeysuckle I have over a trellis. It does very well. Lavender. Lavender's another one. Hosta, most of the white blooming varieties of hosta do have a scent to them. And I'm not sure, I guess that's the end of that. Now I will go into peonies, but on what I just showed you, does anyone have any questions? No. Okay, good. I'm going into peonies. You ladies could probably come up with 20 others that are fragrant, so this was just a little bit of a tease. Let me just bring up the other one. All right. Okay. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. Here we are. And oops, except that, forgive me for a second, I should have started at current slide because I have grasses in this too. So forgive me for that. Okay. All right, here we go. From current slide. Okay, here we go. Here we go, here we go. So I just mentioned this guy, Festiva maxima. I'll wait till the picture takes place. The older the variety on the peonies, the more likely there will be to be highly fragrant. And there are three types of peonies. Herbaceous is the one that we most often see. And you know that herbaceous dies down to the ground in the fall. The plants are very long lasting. They require very little care. They're not heavy feeders. I throw a little bone meal on them every couple of years. And they tend to be very easy to grow. And you see a couple of varieties. I think those are the two that are CL's favorites there. The second type is ito, or intersectional, and it is a cross between herbaceous and a tree peony. So it's got some characteristics of both. And one of the things that I like about it, because it's a hybrid, and these don't tend to be very fragrant, is you get some wonderful colors. For some reason on the screen it's not showing that well. These are a wonderful yellow. Bartzella is a wonderful yellow, and big flower heads. I mean, I'm talking flower heads that are that big. They're really big. There are not as many blooms on these as you're going to get with your typical herbaceous. My herbaceous, I can have 10, 15 blooms. On the ito, even the mature ones, maybe 5 or 6. But they're so worth it because they're so beautiful and they look great, 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 great in flower arrangements. I do not put a weed barrier down because they grow from the base and it would restrict their growth. And that's true of any of the peonies that I'm going to show you here. The third type is the tree peony, and this is the one we don't see all that often. They grow on a woody stem, and I should have mentioned with the ito, you do cut them down right to the ground in the fall like the herbaceous, because they are a soft stem. But the tree peony has a woody stem which defoliates in the fall, so you don't cut those back. They usually bloom earlier, and they too have the larger blooms, and they come in a real enormous variety of colors. Again, the one I'm showing here is a yellow. And depending on the variety, the height of them really varies. They can be as short as 20 inches or as tall as 8 feet. And once they're established, they don't like to be moved, and one of the reasons is they're grafted. 90% of these are grafted, and they don't like to be moved. They can be hard to get started, and they push out their buds so early they can get nipped by a frost if we have a late frost, but luckily on Cape Cod that doesn't happen too often. Now, I just told you the 3 different types of peonies, but I'm going to now go through the bloom types because there are different bloom types. You have singles, which are a single row of broad petals and a mass of stamens and carpels, creating a wide, almost perfectly round peony. And these are herbaceous. These in my garden tend to be the last ones to flower, which is nice. It extends my season of peonies because one of my objections about peonies is they're like irises. The blooms aren't around too long. You got to enjoy them while they're blooming. The second is a semi-double, which is several rows of petals. It has a layered look. These 2 are herbaceous. So again, you're seeing those stamens and carpels in the center, but this has more leaves to it. Another type are called Japanese, and they didn't start in Japan, but these are the ones that the Japanese gardeners love. They have a layered look with very large centers, and their petals are somewhat curved. Very, very pretty flowers. Different looking. The first time I saw some of these, I actually wondered if they were peonies. And then your full double. And there are several layers of petals, often without a center. Other parts of the flower develop into petals, the carpels and stamens. And these are really the ones we see the most. These are the easiest to find in the garden centers. And many of these are old varieties that can be very fragrant, like my dear Festiva Maxima down there. And then there's one, and I think this is such a funny name, it's called the Bomb. It really has no crown. And the carpels and stamens have developed into petals, and it looks a little like a double, but it's more globe shape. And you can kind of see that it has sort of these flat leaves at the bottom, but then it looks like the double in the center. They're very interesting. I like these a lot. That red charm is really pretty in the garden. Some fragrant peonies I'm going to show you here. These are some of the most fragrant. There are others that are fragrant, but these are probably the ones that are the most fragrant. And you kind of saw this in the other. These 2 are CL's, 2 of CL's favorites. The Raspberry Sundae is the Bomb, and the Pink Parfait is the double. Both very nice, both very easy to grow. So in general, they grow well within our zone. Most of them are only 2 to 3 feet unless they're a tree peony. The itos can be a little bit larger. They bloom usually early to mid-June, depending on how cold our spring has been. Their flowers can range from 3 to 8 inches. I told the types. They do like full sun. They like 6+ hours, and if you don't have them in the sun, they may not be blooming or have very small blooms. They have average water needs, and they need to be cut back in the fall. They can be cut back earlier, and some of the varieties are susceptible to powdery mildew. It doesn't hurt them, it looks ugly. And it doesn't, if you don't like the look of the powdery mildew on them, they can be cut down in end of July, and it doesn't hurt them. They still come back. But there are a few varieties that get powdery mildew. Okay, now we're going to talk about planting them, because the number one reason that I have found that people are not getting blooms on peonies are they're planted too deep. It could be that they're not getting enough sun too, because some people will say, they were great for years, they're not blooming now. Well, what happened in your landscape? Well, my trees got bigger. Okay, it's too shady, move them. But they want their eyes, and you can see the eyes here. You can see the eyes over here. They want to be no more than a ½ inch below ground level. And honestly, when I plant them, they're right at ground level. So I mulch very sparingly around them, because what happens with mulch? You put it down year after year, it gets thicker and thicker, and they get deeper and deeper. So I tend to just pull the mulch away from them. You propagate them by dividing the root ball. Often, with something like this, you can either cut it right in the middle, or it may actually have created two plants that you can just pull apart. When you buy them, often they only have 1 or 2 eyes and are smaller than this, and that's okay. You may not get a bloom the first year or two, but if you've planted them properly and you're giving them lots of sun, a couple years, you'll have a lot. That Festiva Maxima was one plant in my grandmother's garden I must have divided and given away at least a dozen of them, and I probably have 10 of them in my garden out of one plant that I moved in the early 70s. So, and they like a lean diet, maybe just a little bit of compost. As I said, I throw on a little bone meal every couple of years. And they're fine with our acidic soil, but sometimes you might throw a little bit of lime on them. So very important. This is the herbaceous and the itos. And if you buy one in the garden center when you plant it, I don't know if you guys have found this. This is one of my pet peeves, especially with trees. They have them too deep in the pot. So check your peony if you buy a peony. And now is the perfect time to buy peonies. You will see them in pots in the garden centers in the spring, but now is the perfect time if you're buying them bare root. And there are a lot of places that sell them bare root. Now, it's totally different with tree peonies, and my husband accuses me of never killing anything in the garden, but I have killed a couple tree peonies. And with tree peonies, like I said, they're generally grafted. You see the graft down here, and they're grafted to a peony, likely a herbaceous, that blooms like crazy. And so the graft is way down there. You need to have 4 to 6 inches between that graft and ground level. Otherwise, the graft is going to have suckers coming out of it. And if it has suckers, it's pulling energy away from the tree peony. So very, very important. And I only have one in my garden at this time. I bought it bare root because I wanted to see where that graft was. I didn't trust buying one in a garden center that might not have been planted deep enough. These can sometimes be very hard to get started, but once you get them started, I saw one in another master gardener's garden. It had to have been 6 feet tall, and it was just covered with blooms. It was beautiful, and the one she had was very fragrant. I showed you these pictures before, so I'm going to just kind of slide through them. And like I said, they like to be transplanted in the fall. This is my new house that I'm in Eastham that we had built. I had no choice. I had to move them in early May because I was moving them from one house to the other. They did beautifully, especially the Ito that was down here. And they had blooms the first year. I couldn't believe it, but this is a whole row that I have, and they're great. I've got to I looked to see if I had a spring picture, and I didn't, but they do great. So, as we heard with the pollinators, don't forget to put some flowers in that attract the pollinators. And there's one other thing I want to say about peonies, because a few years ago, when the Boston Flower Show was going on in late winter, the master gardeners used to run a bus up to it, which was wonderful because I don't like to drive into Boston. And I sat in a program on peonies done by a group from New Jersey who have a business called Peony Envy. I know. They've got great plants, though, and they have so many acres of peonies. It's unbelievable. They will come to the show with some peony plants, but right now is when they're selling most of their plants. It was interesting to hear them talk because they said for all the money they make on selling peonies, they make twice as much selling peony flowers. So we were all thinking, why is that? And they go, their warehouse, they have, and they showed a picture, they have an entire wall of refrigerators. And they said with peonies, if you cut them when the color just begins to show on the bud, and you refrigerate them, when you take them out, they'll bloom. So they sell peonies to the floral trade 12 months of the year. And I've never tried this. I personally always have my refrigerator stuffed, so I don't have the room for it. But it was interesting to hear that. And I always wondered how brides that were in February had peonies in their bouquets. Well, that's how they do it. And I thought that was really interesting, and I mentioned that to you because especially if you were having company maybe a couple weeks after what the peonies typically bloomed, you might try that and then impress your company by saying, hey, I have peony blooms and it's July. What can I say? So any questions on peonies? Oh, I have a little plug for the hydrangea tour, so I'll put this in. Actually, the hydrangea tour, I was using this in 22, but the 25 tour, I believe, is the 11th to the 20th of July. And I'm sure you know, it's $5 per garden, and the proceeds go to a partner nonprofit. The master gardeners always have at least 4. And I'm going to show you an example from the 22 tour. Now, the house that I have in Eastham is right down by the water, and we started with a totally wooded acre. It looked like this, and this was the day they cut the driveway in. And this was May 2017, and we moved in June of 2018. So in 3 years, these pictures are from the summer of 2021. It looked like this. This lower one is where the peonies are in the back here with the Shastas and the other plants in front of it. Another plant that I love in the garden, you see up here, I love caladium bulbs. Again, they're a tropical. Treat them as a annual. I actually started my bulbs after I repotted or uppotted my tomato plants on my heat mats, and I had caladiums unbelievable this year that were all the leaves and looked great instead of having to wait for them. Some other pictures. I do pottery. Here's some pottery fish that I've done. I also have a large veggie garden. Yeah, I'm always, August I was dehydrating and canning like crazy.